Hi everyone, and welcome to Politics by Numbers with Electoral Calculus. I'm Bryony Richter, and I'm here with our founder, Martin Baxter, and we're going to discuss today a major new piece of research that we conducted with Find Out Now, which looks at how British public opinion is evolving through time and past those traditional left-right divides. And there's some really fascinating insights that we want to get into. So Martin, from the top, can you explain just a little bit about what Politics 3D and what it shows us past the simple left-right divide?
Why do you say it's moving beyond that, looking at more of a multi-dimensional approach to politics because people have different views on different themes. And we started off with an experimental list of a lot of questions. We had 70 questions over 7 themes. So we were looking at economics, environmentalism, authoritarianism, cultural issues, wokeness, as it's called. Lots of things to see which themes actually resonate with the public and where we can spot patterns and where people have got common beliefs and political views in particular directions. And at the end of all that of that testing, we found 15 what we call golden questions, which were the best questions for identifying where people stood politically. And there were also 3, we could call them golden themes. And those themes were economic, the traditional left-right. Are you basically in favor of a bigger government or a smaller government? Cultural, which includes all the sort of the so-called culture wars and wokeism, but essentially questions about immigration and multiculturalism and international law. And the third one was a very interesting one, was about liberty versus authority, that in terms of personal freedom, things like vaccines or planning permissions or who should decide for children, should be schools or parents, those sorts of questions that cut across party lines in an interesting way as well. So we'll see more about all of those in this broadcast.
Yeah, of course. And we are in a more complex political landscape now with 5 parties competing for the same voter pool. So obviously these splits are kind of showing us where those parties might be able to grab those voters and where they might be able to retain. And of course, after we did that, we did our cluster analysis, which created those 7 unique distinct tribes that we're going to talk a little bit about today. So I just wanted you to maybe give us a quick 1-sentence brief on each tribe. We had 7 of them, and they're quite unique in their own way.
Yeah, so let's just start with the tribes. With the 15 questions, for each respondent, we get a political score for each of the themes. So we get an economic score, a cultural score, and a liberty authority score. So economic, people are on the left-right scale. Cultural, we also called it left and right. And on the freedom scale, we went from regulated to free. So everybody gets every respondent who put on the poll, and everyone who there's a survey people can take on the website if they're interested to know their own position, gets a 3-dimensional position in our 3-dimensional political space. So it's richer than left-right, as you said, and so people become their positions are a dot somewhere in this 3-dimensional space. But as you say, once we've got all the people's positions, we can start looking for patterns, for people who are gathering together with other people who have similar attitudes. And we call these groups the tribes. In maths terms, this is segmentation analysis or cluster analysis, but we have political tribes. We have 7 of those we identified. And going from the most left to the most right, those are the strong left, who are sort of left on every axis, economic, cultural, and mildly authoritarian, but not too much. Then we've got a centrist or centrist left group who are a bit left-wing economically and culturally, but much more towards the centre. Then there are an interesting group called the hands-off, who aren't interested in politics. They think there's too much politics going on. It's in their face. They want it to go away. They score very strongly for personal freedom. Towards the right of politics, there's 4 groups, but they all have different views. There's the somewheres who are culturally very right-wing, so that they're anti-immigration, they're suspicious of multiculturalism and international law, but economically fairly neutral. But even within that, there's 3 different groups. There's the strong right, who are straightforwardly right, that they are right on economics, right on culture, generally a little bit for individual liberty. So there's the paternalists, who are economically right-wing, but authoritarian. They're culturally right-wing as well, but they would like to tell other people what to do. A group we call kind capitalists, who are economically right-wing, but culturally a bit left-wing, more pro-immigration, pro-international law. So that within the right, there's a variety of opinions.
And one of the key findings that we then pulled out in terms of looking at parties and party support was that actually, despite what some people might think, Reform supporters are actually leaning quite right wing on the economy. In fact, our economic score shows Reform on plus 34% compared to the Conservatives, which were on plus 32. So they're actually, in some cases, slightly more right wing economically. What do you take from that? And is that a surprise?
Yes, I was slightly surprised. I'd always thought that Reform obviously would be more right wing on cultural
Yeah,
issues, which is certainly true.
which they are, definitely.
Absolutely. And reform policies, although they're, a bit free market, there's also, they're keen on the pensions triple lock and increased state spending in various ways. But reform supporters, and this is current supporters as of 2026, are economically as right wing or slightly more right wing than conservatives. On the left, things are more as you would expect, actually. The Liberal Democrat supporters, although they are to the left of centre, are nearer the middle. Labour are a bit more clearly left-wing on economics and culture, and Green Party supporters are the most. So that the popular view is confirmed by the data that the Green Party are to the left, Labour slightly less so, Lib Dems nearer the middle, Conservatives nearer the middle on the right, and Reform further away, slightly on economics, and particularly on the cultural issues. So there's it's not quite a straight spectrum, but it's a sort of slightly bending banana shape.
And I mean, the interesting thing, obviously, as you mentioned, was that we're seeing a bit of fragmentation on the right and quite a tight clustering of parties on the left, of supporters on the left. What do you think's driving that fragmentation on the right? Usually they're the ones that are unifying more behind one centre of gravity, yet we're seeing them split across 3 or 4 different tribes?
Yes, well, yeah, focusing on the tribes particularly more than the parties. So in terms of actual ideology, on the left, let's start there. People are quite united in the sense that there's a coherent, you might call it a party line. If you're on the left, you're going to be left-wing on economics and left-wing on the cultural issues. And there's not really people who are sort of mixing and matching. Some people are more hardline than others, but it's fairly clear. On the right, though, there's more difference of opinion. Most people on the right are right-wing economically, but not all. The somewheres are different.
Yes.
Most of them are right culturally, but not all of them. The kind capitalists are different.
And capitalists don't mind multiculturalism
Yep.
very much compared to strong
On the
right.
right, they mostly tend to individual freedom, but not all of them. The paternalists are different. So that the right, it must be hard to be a politician on the right of centre because there's not one thing you can say that's going to appeal to all your potential supporters, that some will agree and some will disagree. The left is more united, whether that is a consistency of belief or whether cancel culture has sort of coerced people into line so that they're a bit scared to deviate from the party line is hard to say. But the left is a bit more ideologically coherent or unified or disciplined than people on the right.
Okay, and we've got those 2 sets of groups there, and they, as much as they're spread out a little bit, we know that they're on the left and on the right. But then there's this interesting group that we've analysed, which are the hands-off. And they're basically the group that are just fed up with politics, really just want politicians to stay out of their life. They've had enough of it. As many of you might remember, Brenda from Bristol in 2017 snapped general election, said there's far too much politics going on. That's their spiritual guide. And they're actually quite a significant group. So can you talk a little bit about them and why they'll be quite important for future elections?
Yeah, so I think Brenda from Bristol made some very serious and real comments in that interview, which are a little bit glossed over. She was treated in a slightly light-hearted way, but she actually represents a very serious and very real, and I think growing strand in British public opinion, which is there is a lot of politics around. And I think with maybe on both the left and the right, but kicking off with some of the woke type issues, there has been an increased politicization of things, that people crack down on activities which used to be outside the sphere of politics are now more inside the sphere of politics. And there's a significant proportion of the British public which does not like that, which resents it slightly, and wishes that the politicians would get out of their way and their face, as it were. So it's a growing group, and it's an important group. Of course, whether it's politically salient is an interesting question, because this group has quite a low turnout at general elections because they're not fans of politics. They don't see quite why they should take part in the politicians' exercises all the time. And we will see one slightly strange, perhaps slightly worrying thing is that turnout in the two groups furthest from the center, the strong left and the strong right, was highest. It was, I think, 88% or something like that, whereas turnout in hands-off and centrist groups was nearer 50%. So those people in the middle, the disenchanted people in the middle, are less likely to vote, and that means politicians will be less likely to care what they think. So it's a slight paradox for the hands-off guys that if they want to be listened to, they need to vote.
But they want politicians to just keep their distance just a bit. And of course, there is quite a way to go. We think until the next general election, a lot can change in those next couple of years. But this research has definitely shed a fascinating spotlight on British politics by revealing the ideological unity on the left compared with the right, and obviously these individual groups that were pulling out. And if listeners at home would like to, as Martin said, map out their own political position, you can do that, and I'll be sharing the link in the description after this video. So thank you very much for listening to our little brief on our Politics 3D. Thanks very much, and see you on the next one.
Bye-bye.